Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today, let's talk about language learning versus language acquisition. So this is a really important distinction to make if you want to have a very efficient learning process when you're learning a language. So language learning, let's start there first. That typically happens in a classroom setting. It's when a teacher gets in front of you, in front of the class, and explains to you how the language works. So this involves things like vocabulary lists, grammar, explanations, and activities, things like fill in the blank activities. This is definitely language learning. You go into the experience knowing what you want to work on, which is you want to learn some things about a language, and you are in the mindset of that's what I'm supposed to get out of this experience. You are completely aware of what you are doing as you are doing it. That is conscious. It is a conscious learning experience. Acquisition, on the other hand, is not a conscious learning experience at all. When we acquire a language, we develop those language skills without even realizing that's what we're doing. So when we talk about little kids and babies, and then as they grow and develop, they get better with language, we call that process language acquisition. When somebody goes to a foreign country and they are immersed in the language, by and large, their development with the language is language acquisition. So these are people who do not realize as it's happening that they are acquiring language. So is one better than the other? I would say actually yes. In most cases, acquisition is a much better experience and it's much more effective than language learning. So then the next question is, why do we spend so much time in school focused on language learning than language acquisition? Well, that's how school has been set up for a very long time, and it's very hard to change these processes. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do language learning. We do that with our own native languages. Like, I am a native speaker of English, and when I was growing up, especially in the later part of elementary school and much of middle school, we did a lot of grammar-focused activities. We had a lot of vocabulary lists that we had to learn. And so language learning isn't necessarily bad, it's just tends to not be as efficient as language acquisition, and language learning tends to feel like work, whereas language acquisition doesn't feel like work at all. So the reason that language acquisition tends to be very effective is that we're all born with the ability to use language. If you look at like a brain scan of an infant, there are parts of the brain that are ready for language use. And if you scan that same person when, say, they're 7 years old, you'll see those parts are still there and they're more developed because they've had language input throughout their lives. They've been using it throughout their lives, and this part of their brain has developed far more. Most of that came through acquisition. Some of that would have come through learning, like explicit learning taught in school. So it's not that learning is bad, it's just inefficient in comparison to acquisition. Another way to think about it is, if we really want to have a full understanding of a language, we won't get that all through acquisition. We need to do some learning. So if you want to understand the mechanics of grammar, for example, generally speaking, you have to study it through learning to understand how to pick it apart and put it back together on a conscious level. On an unconscious level, your brain is ready to do all of that work for you without you even having to think about it, and you will most likely get it right because of acquisition. It's just that you won't be able to explain why it's correct. You'll just know that it is correct. That's the big difference between learning and acquisition. Your awareness of why something is right comes through learning. Your ability to just do it without thinking comes through acquisition. So when it comes to making a plan on how should you study a language or go about developing skills in a language, should you focus on one versus the other? Should there be a blend of both? My personal take on this is that there should be a blend of both. Now, most language teaching schools are going to be heavily focused on conscious learning. Not all of them, but the vast majority that I've experienced and witnessed, yeah, they're highly focused on language learning. This, to me, should be a supplement to acquisition. So acquisition is going to come through lots and lots of exposure to that language in scenarios where you have some reason to care, to understand what's going on. So, for example, you go into an immersive experience. That might mean you go to that country, or that might mean you go to a party with people from that country, but it's in your country, but everybody at that party is from this other country where they speak that language that is the one that you want to have ability to use. In that environment, if you want to communicate with other people, that will give you some motivation to use what you have. And you might be pretty limited in that experience, say for those few hours you're at the party, but you will feel so much motivation because of the desire to connect with other people that your brain will automatically start making connections and putting things together without you even realizing it. And so in that few hours at the party, you will have done probably far more in your language learning process than spending a few hours in a classroom doing conscious learning of the language. I hope that makes sense and is relatable. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I spent years from the age of 8 through 18 in Spanish language classrooms and acquired very little Spanish. Like when I went to college, I only tested out of 1 semester of the language, which is, you would think, oh my God, 10 years of study and you've only tested out of 1 semester. And I got A's, by the way, all those years. It's just that even though the intention is there and everybody means well in the process of putting students in these classrooms, they're just not nearly as effective as, say, going to Mexico for a month to acquire Spanish, right? Going there and living with a host family. That is going to put all the pieces together much faster in that 1 month than 10 years of language classroom study. Not to say that the 10 years prior didn't help me in that month. I'm just saying that it, a lot got done in that 1 month that did not get done in 10 years. So the idea, if you want my advice on what you should do in terms of language acquisition and developing your language skills, is to highly focus on acquisition and to create an environment for yourself that mimics immersive experiences so that you are much more likely to acquire the language on an unconscious level, because that is where things are really going to come together very quickly for you. And you won't be able to explain why something is the way it is, but you will know, just like how a native speaker just knows. Okay, that's what you really need to do for yourself. And then you can use language learning in a school with a tutor, whatever it may be. You can use language learning to supplement your language acquisition process. So you will use the conscious learning activities that are typically given to you in school. And what's also really nice about a lot of school-based learning, even though it's conscious, it's very structured and well organized usually. So then that way the student feels like they're systematically getting more and more and they understand what's being given to them. So that way, as you acquire things through more of a natural real world life experience, when you get into the classroom and you see similar things happening in class, you can say, okay, now I understand why this works like that. I just knew or had a hunch it was like that, but now I understand why. So you will get the more automatic understanding from acquisition, and then you will understand the why behind it through language learning in class. The other good thing about class is that because of the way these things are set up, people tend to stick with it for longer because there is a bigger program, and you're going through a structure and you see yourself advancing, and that can feel good and that can keep students motivated for quite a while. So that can be a very good thing in terms of being in a classroom. It's just, from my experience, no school is ever going to give you everything. It's never going to be enough if you stay in a structured school environment. You have to get yourself out of that. You have to see it as just one piece of the puzzle and really give yourself life experiences in that language, because that's when everything is really going to come together, and it's not going to feel like work. It'll feel like you're doing something, but it won't feel like heavy lifting or such heavy lifting as much. It'll just feel like you're living your life, and somehow, I don't understand how, somehow I just came out the other end knowing all this and having the ability to use it, and that's really great. So I hope this was helpful for you to understand the differences between language learning and language acquisition, and to realize that really, if you want to get great at a language, you really want to focus on the acquisition more than the learning. I definitely think learning is a great supplement to acquisition, especially because we don't always acquire everything on our own. Sometimes we need somebody to help us do something better, not just with languages, but with anything. If you're just completely left to your own devices, you might miss something. But at the end of the day, acquisition is what's going to get you really, really far, and learning can support that. But in and of itself, learning is not an end game from my perspective, in my experience teaching and learning about these processes. So please leave me any comments or questions that you have below in the comments section. Be curious to help you out with anything you might be wondering about, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.